Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 989th New Social Environment. Grateful to be in this space with you on a Friday afternoon here in New York. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Cauleen Smith and Zoë Hopkins. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Cauleen Smith is a filmmaker and artist whose interdisciplinary work expands from histories and practices of experimental film. Through immersive installations, moving image works, sculpted objects, and textiles, she engages with non-Western cosmologies, Afro-diasporic histories, Black cultural icons, real and speculative utopias, and in her words, the everyday possibilities of the imagination. In addition to many group exhibitions, she's had solo exhibitions at MoCA and LA's Museum of Contemporary Art, among others. She has a BA in cinema from San Francisco State University and an MFA in filmmaking from the University of California in Los Angeles. And our host today, Zoë Hopkins, is a writer and critic based in New York. Her writing has been published in the Brooklyn Rail, Art Forum, Cultured and Hyperallergic. She received her BA in art history and African American studies at Harvard University and is currently working on her MA in modern and contemporary art at Columbia University. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Zoë to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chloe, for that introduction. And thank you, Cauleen, for being here. I'm so thrilled to be in conversation with you. And I already told you how much I've been fangirling over the years. So this is a real honor and treat as a fellow Black feminist co-conspirator. I can't wait for what's about to unfold.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. I'm so excited to speak with you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, and thank you for also your installation currently on view at 52 Walker. And I had the privilege of seeing it a few days ago. Encourage any and all folks in New York to go and see it. And on that note, should we get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, amazing. Chloe, I'll give you a second to pull up the slides. Wonderful. Okay, so the title of this exhibition is the Wanda Coleman Songbook, and I want to start there. So I think the last time your work was in New York, it was at the Whitney, and there you showed your video Sojourner, which is really about honoring and paying homage to Black feminist and Black women creators and thinkers who are your sort of intellectual ancestors. So in that video, I remember the Combahee River Collective was surfacing, the memory of Alice Coltrane was surfacing. And I just wanted to ask you about this practice of honoring, narrating, and caring for the lives of Black women creators and thinkers. In this case, Wanda Coleman. So I want to know a bit more about how you came to arrive at this focus on Wanda, how your affective ties with her as a poet and a thinker have developed over time, and when did you realize that you wanted to make work about her?
Yes, I think of it is just like a way that I like to make work, is kind of like learning through the thoughts and materials, I guess, the studies of others, whether it's Sun Ra or Wanda Coleman or Alice Coltrane or Rebecca Cox Jackson. I'm kind of while I'm thinking about them, and I'm trying to place myself in relation to them almost like a student. And so in that relation, I'm trying to sort of demonstrate what I'm learning and the things that I'm making, or amplify or amend and annex on or through and with what they've already sort of built, and maybe even just sort of like in a quirky way, demonstrate like an effect or an impact. Like it's amazing to be aware of this work, and I'm usually always frustrated that I'm so late getting to learning about things, you know. So I think that's how I think of the work more than as like honoring. I think the honoring just comes through the kind of deep study that I want to do with them, and like how profoundly I feel their influence, you know.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I'm thinking also of study as something that is done in the collective, and through and with other people, other memories, other voices. And of course, there is um, a collective impulse and impetus embedded in the work here, um,
Mm.
particularly in the EP that this work has fomented. So you've worked with collaborators, including with a really wide range of collaborators from both LA and outside of LA, to bring this project to fruition. And I wanted to ask you about what this collective reading of Wanda's poetry allowed you to do. How did it expand your understanding of her work? How did this sort of um, biography crafted through polyphony enable you to think differently about the life of this great poet and as you said, this teacher?
Yeah. I guess with this project in particular, I just the deeper I started reading Wanda, the more curious I became about the musicality in her poetry, and how when she reads her poetry, there's a different kind of musicality than what I would read on the page. And I was really interested in the form of how she writes, her performativity, and then curious about like how other people might inhabit or interpret what often looked to me almost like blues limericks or song lyrics, you know. And I was just yeah, I was just curious about it. And initially I just thought, what would it I just wonder what other musicians would do with this, like particularly Black women composers and performers. I wanted to know. And also because I know my whole sort of like revisiting of Wanda and moving back here in LA came through a poet telling me or reminding me to read Wanda. Latasha Nevada Diggs just sent me a picture of African sleeping sickness, and I was like, right, that's right, that's it, that's going to be like my compass for returning back home to LA. And I think I just love the way that poets, like Wanda's a poet's poet, and I wanted like these really powerful performers and musicians who are also sort of like the performers or musicians that other performers and musicians regard really highly. I was just curious to see what they would do, you know.
Yeah, she really is. And I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't super familiar with her work until this reintroduction to it through your installation. And then I was reading Siddhartha's review in the New York Times, and he brought up how Terrence Hayes speaks profusely about Wanda Coleman and all of these poetic mentors of mine, interlocutors. Yeah, it was just amazing to see the way that she has been held in such love and tenderness and regard by her poetic community. And then also to think about what I really loved about this installation was the actual physical presence of her books
Mhm.
on the ottoman. And when I was there, it was later in the day, so the gallery was a little bit quiet, but there were a lot of people reading her books, sitting on the couches and just allowing themselves to lose themselves in the world of her poetry. And I also was, given a profound sense of appreciation for how prolific she was as a poet, because there must have been like 20 books
Yeah.
on the ottoman or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And then we also see in the video these moments of you flipping through her poetry, right? We see what I presume is your hand rubbing up against the books. And right there's this sort of like tactile haptic engagement with the poetry that's unfolding on the screen. And then that's unfolding also in real time in the galleries as people engage with the books. And so I wanted to ask you about that decision to feature the books both in the videos, and then in physical space in the gallery, and yeah, what that intervention of yeah, that invitation to reading allows the installation to do.
Yeah, you know, just the process of sort of collecting Wanda's books, and this real regard for Black Sparrow Press, for first for picking her up when she was quite young, like seeing this talent, and then really giving her the freedom with each book to make a book that she wanted to make. And these Black Sparrow Press books, I think, are really, really like wonderful sort of like demonstrations of like the kind of relationship a publisher can have with a writer and artist. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of breadth and depth. They're really eccentric, like essays and short stories mixed with poems, a novel. Like it's just fantastic how much latitude she was given. And I felt like every time I found one of these books, there was like a thing about the way that they're made, the type of print, like which doesn't happen anymore. Books are not made this lovingly anymore. The graphic design, the selection of font, the layout, all of it was just to me so very much about a kind of like regard for this work that I really wanted people to access immediately. It was um like a complete agreement with the Gallery of 52 Walker. Everybody were like, yes, those books, they have to be out there. Some of them are at the desk because they're really hard to find. They're out of print. You know what I mean? So we don't really want them maybe walking out of the gallery. But I think that also just the compulsion that someone might pick up like Mercurochrome, which is one of my favorite volumes, and just like be like really want to keep it. I'm like, I kind of love that. I get that because
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and also I think the reason that Wanda isn't so like, it's not surprising that maybe her work might be new to a younger writer, honestly, because she's not quotable in that uplift poetry kind of way. You know, like you can't just like pull a line out and put it on Instagram and everyone's like, oh yes, thank you, I needed that affirmation. She's really unapologetically describing, you know, dissonance, disappointment, grief, while also being very tender, very vulnerable, very raw. And you have to actually take in the whole poem. You can't just glance at it in the projection. I try to hold a lot of poems up, you know what I mean? I try to give some time to the reading, but to me, like the most important part of this project is this consideration of Wanda Coleman's worldview and work. Like that is and also her relation. I found it intensely like useful in terms of a relationship to a particular city. Or I think she is one of those writers that just really is an LA writer. Like, you know what I mean? And that seemed that seemed like something you would have to just encounter her books to really see the consistency in that.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much that you brought up that I want to attend to. The first of which is the emotional register of these poems. You brought up the words dissonance and disappointment, grief, tension. These are complicated poems, and they invite us to sit in a complex range of emotions. And I, as a visitor to the gallery, was feeling really awash, right, in the sensitivity, the grief, the melancholia of her poems. And you know, I was also aware that for you, this exhibition was a way of grieving some parts of LA that have been lost or that have changed over time. But at the same time, and I mentioned this to you before we opened up the Zoom to participants, but at the same time, there's this immense feeling of safety and comfort in the space, right? There's this plush carpeting underfoot. There are these really comfortable couches that folks felt welcome to sit on. There's a softness of lighting, right? Lots of pink and purple and orange tones. And then there's this scent, which I believe comes from parks in LA, that is just the most beautiful, luxurious scent that I wanted to carry home with me. So yeah, there was for me this sort of complex negotiation between comfort and feeling really at home, and then also the dissonance that you brought up that attends and subtends Wanda's poetry. So yeah, this is all to sort of ask what is the kind of emotional register that you were aiming to give life to or make room for in this installation?
Yeah, I think well, for me, the most important thing was the EP, the record,
Mm.
and the kind of, I felt like almost magical way in which these disparate artists who have very different ways of making their music and performing, very different styles and genres, even, I think that I really could invite them to consider a poem, and that what they gave back to me really could coexist on one slab of wax together, like in a linear sense. That kind of blew my mind, and I really wanted people to listen to like what, like the kind of psycho emotional spaces that are possible with Wanda's work, and that these artists found, or the way in which they approached the kind of, I mean, there's a kind of brutality in a lot of Wanda's poems that is inescapable. And so even when I was selecting the poems, I was trying to find things that I was thinking about the artists that I wanted to invite, and trying to find things even that we could recirculate. And it was interesting, especially because I had an idea about Wanda's ability to describe like the mundane minutia, like minutia, the mundane minutia of LA, like the weather, like just the general environment, and then also her her way of living and moving through the city, like, which is like side A is like Miles in the Night, which to me is about this, like this movement, the car, like the streets, the night, the LA at night, and then this other thing, which is like the survival, and the tension of like the kind of violent romance of the night, and the real brutal tedium of surviving in the day, but through this dazzling writing that Wanda does. Like this, like sometimes I'm shocked, like I'm reading a poem, and by the time I get to the end of it, I would feel pierced. You know what I mean? And I love the way the all the artists did that. And I really just wanted a space where you could listen. And when I went to visit Alice Smith in her studio, she was recording, not this, she wasn't even recording this. I was just visiting her, and I was hanging out in the recording studio. And as a filmmaker, I don't really get to hang out with musicians. I'm not cool like that. And so I was just like, wow, this is such a creative space. And I couldn't even understand what they were doing. I knew they were making music and recording, but it mostly seemed like they were like hanging out. And then all of a sudden, like I turn around and Alice is like playing a vibraphone. And I was like, wait, really? Like, you know what I mean? And there are like Persian rugs everywhere, and like old couches that you just sunk into in the engineering room. And I loved how that feeling of like, yeah, come into the studio and hang out and listen. And like, you know what I mean? And how little you need to do this work, like physically, you just need a little bit of comfort, and then you can do this work. And I wanted that for this space, in terms of like how to receive the sounds of the EP. And then the video is something, I've been calling it an envelope. I've been calling it a wrapper. It's the space. It's the I guess the visual document of Los Angeles as a city. And I kind of wanted to render it with this tension of like my really hypersensitivity to the ways that people like to typecast LA, and like the kind of cliches that people bring up about the city, some of which are true and some of which are wildly inaccurate. like the tension between those things and the intimacy of what it's like to live here. Because the car is an alienating object, but it's also a kind of intimate private capsule. And the same with our suburban style homes. And the same with like so much of the design of the city. And so much of what is really, really gorgeous and amazing about this city is inaccessible until someone invites you in. And so I kind of just wanted that outside feeling, like that alienated feeling, like the feeling of like not quite being in, because I felt like in that way, maybe you get a sense of like what it's like out here on these streets in LA, which is like a little bit, yeah. And then also this tension between the really gorgeous and the brutal horror of the city. Like, you know, because of the weather, we can have a really extreme homeless problem because you can survive most nights on the streets here without too much discomfort. You know what I mean? And uh it's ever since I've moved back, it's just been really difficult to step over human bodies to like go get a coffee or have brunch or um like not even realize that there's a person sleeping under this bush over here while I'm standing here talking to my friends on the street. Those kinds of, there's a gorgeous sunset or maybe even a rainbow, and then you turn around and you look and there's somebody who is in real need of some kind of like psychosocial services and no one's going to give them that help. And that is every day, all day in LA. The tension between something really beautiful and startlingly gorgeous and something that makes you question like how you even tolerate yourself, let alone the conditions that other people live in the city, you know? So I wanted that video wrapper to kind of glance against those things, kind of like when you're a child in the car seat in the back of the car and you're just looking out the window, kind of almost like that, like a kind of moving through. And so that you could really hear some of the things that the artists are doing with the music. I'm sorry, that was kind of long-winded, maybe rambling, but
Oh, not at all. No, no, this is wow. I mean, I'm thinking so much about, yeah, the brutality and the gorgeousness of it all, those things thrown together. And, you know, as someone, yeah, born and raised here in New York, I resonate deeply with those feelings of how to wrestling with how to hold that complexity, and how to, you know, you mentioned I feel disturbed when I go to get a coffee and I see someone, I have to step over somebody, and how to hold on to that feeling of being disturbed, you know, not letting go of that disquietude, and holding on to that humanity that is all we can do truly. And then also, you know, I can't think about the term the weather without thinking about Christina Sharp's In the Wake. I really, I was so glad to see that the B-side of the album is called The Weather. Right. She writes the total climate, the weather is the total climate is anti-Black. And that really changed my perception of the way that we think about environment, climate, the totality of the world that we live in. So yeah, wanted to name that as well. And then I also wanted to come back to these cars that are so beautiful, like arrestingly beautiful. And the movement, the sense of rhythm, the kind of elliptical encircling of the city. And there's all of these, there's this presence, this preponderance of cars and highways. And I wanted to think a little bit about rhythm, because in addition to the literal poetics that are translated and transmitted through the reading of Coleman's poetry, the video, which you named so beautifully as an envelope, also feels like it has its own sort of a poetic rhythm, its own tempo. And so I wanted to ask you to that end how you are thinking about the poetics of the film as well, the visual poetics of the space, as we're kind of moving through LA through the window of these cars, through your eyes, through Wanda's eyes. Yeah, what are the poetic temporalities that are unfolding?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Mariko Monroe, my producer, about how to film this, she's like, well, I'm gonna need a shot list. So I ended up writing like this crazy haiku, basically. It's not haiku because it's like 100 lines long, but it's just basically just this list of like when I envision LA, what LA is, which once I wrote it out, I realized a lot of it was like encounters with living things like birds and trees, like succulents and sages, um, coyotes and possums and ravens and parakeets, and you know what I mean. And I was like, it's also like LA is still, I think, mourning the loss of our mountain lion that lived in our central park, which is Griffith Park. Lived there for I think a decade, P-22, and then was hit by a car and had to be euthanized. And I was obsessed with this mountain lion, like so many Angelinos. Like, we love this mountain lion. And we love the idea that we could, like, this park, which is like the heart of this city, that we could share it with this really tenacious, clever, wild being, P-22, who crossed 4 freeways to get there. And we were afraid he was going to leave to cross 4 more freeways to find a mate. And we're all like obsessed with like, can we get P-22 a girlfriend so he doesn't leave us? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're like, and that's like that's LA. Like, that was like when that cat died. I can't even tell you. Like, I was like, are we gonna have a parade like we did for Prince? Because this is like, important. Like, so there's this, like, I realized like that's what I really experience LA as all these encounters with other living things, which is not the way people think of this city at all. But like, you get to have a backyard here. So yeah, there might be a possum living like under your house that you maybe, you know, leave compost for that, because they get hung, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's like there's coyotes, and people are always worried about their little chihuahuas and whatnot. But it's just startling when you're like walking home, like walking to your car in the middle of the night, you hear something behind you and it is a big dog just like sniffing you out. Like, those are really weird encounters that I don't know. I feel like are very much a part of like having a relationship with the city. I'm sorry, I'm rambling again, but that was like really what I wanted to show. Because there are other things like the inescapability of the palm tree, which is like our greatest cliche. But it's also so mundane that you stop seeing them sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, when we were talking about, I was like, yeah, we got to film some palm trees. And we were like, well, where should we film them? And it's like literally anywhere. Like, okay, let's just go to my driveway and shoot this street. Like, what difference does it make? Because they're literally everywhere. So that kind of thing, up against um, when you do encounter people on the street who are distressed and you can't decide what to do. Do you see them, or do you choose not to see them? Do you watch them, or do you ignore them? Do you call 311? Do you just give them space, like, for fear that if the police come, something worse will happen? You know what I mean? Like, all of that stuff is like the everyday. And and then we were like trying to get smog. We were trying to show smog, but it doesn't happen that much anymore. And I know like New Yorkers like to talk about air pollution, but I think the subway in New York might be worse than an average day in LA at this point.
Probably.
Yeah. But we were just trying to capture both the sort of like the aura, kind of like the way this is a city that is constantly filmed, just like New York, constantly photographed. So you have that simulacrum thing going. But then there's like the punctum, there's the thing that disrupts that, which you have to kind of like linger to know. So I was thinking about sunrise and sunset. I was thinking about how important sunsets are here. I was thinking about the fact that people really do stop what they're doing to watch them here on the regular, because I don't know, it's part of the rhythm of the city. This is a city that kind of is early rising. It's not like a late nightlife city. It's more like you get up with the sun and take a hike. And so those rhythms were more like what I was hoping to grasp. I have a fierce respect for Wanda's grasp of the city. Like she grew up in the hundreds in Watts, like Willowbrook, and she and her brother both found their way to Silver Lake, hanging out with beat poets. And then she worked in the film industry and won an Emmy for writing for daytime soap operas, and worked in all manner of corporate TDM to stay alive. She edited a skin magazine for and it was it's really evident to me that her ambition was this kind of like very broad understanding of Black cultural intellectual production. So it's high and the low. There are people writing into the magazine in prison, and there are film reviews of Ganja and Hess all together. And that was Wanda's idea of Black culture, and I think that's crucial about her. So so her grasp of the city, I was kind of tracing her footsteps, and the room smells like Griffith Park because that was like, she's written several essays about Griffith Park and like meeting Charles Manson in Griffith Park, which is crazy, like hanging out with him. And she's like, she's telling her husband, this guy is totally racist. Like, I cannot stand him. And her husband's like, give him a chance, because he was kind of Marxist-y, like before he went total full tilt ugly. And like, so like, she's just talking about this encounter with this like legendary monster. And that is, Central Park is this place that like the whole city kind of can annex to. So and also that particular smell is like a morning smell, which is the kind of thing that is really LA. The idea that you don't stay up till 4 a.m, you get up at 5 a.m, and you like, you know what I mean? So that kind of stuff.
You're inspiring me to be a better morning person.
Move to LA.
It's time. But yeah, I wanted to first of all name how successful the video is in conveying the multiplicity of LA in terms of, right, we have these blisteringly beautiful sunsets like the one that's on view here, and then we'll also have a shot of a highway right on the other side, or we'll have scenes of palm trees, and then we'll have, you know, a shot of a city block with warehouses and I don't know, do you all use the term bodegas in LA? I guess not.
Corner store, liquor store.
Okay. And that's the other paradox, right? Is like it's a New York show, or it's an LA show that's in New York. Like the way that it holds and navigates these complexities, you know, is really just it does it with so much grace and fullness. And I just wanted to express my gratitude for that. I wanted to return to something you said much earlier in our conversation about the sonics of the show, and how you have created this capacity for visitors to inhabit the musics and musicality of Wanda's poetry. And I wanted to ask about the choice to call the show a songbook instead of a poetry book. And to center, right, the EP as this modality of transmission and sharing that is so situated in the way that we listen to music specifically. There's something about it that feels you know, like a chorus. And I'm reminded also of Saidiya Hartman's work in Wayward Lives, where she talks, there's a chapter called The Chorus Opens the Way. I want to sit with for a moment with the musics of the thing. And as we talked about earlier, there's also the physical presence of books. So there's the accessibility of the things as they unfold on the page, but also this oral experience. And I wanted to ask you about musics and chorus and then also the relative kind of quiet of the video as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're bringing in Sadia's conversation about the chorus, as well as Christina on the weather, like, because these are just like lodestars for me, I think, psychologically, creatively, and the idea that I mean, Wanda is that writer who is writing from the chorus. Like, you know, she's using her body and her situational specificity in this way that devastates me in terms of how well it describes a particular experience in this city in particular, of like existing in a body where everything in the world tells you that it does not see you and does not value you. And even so, Wanda goes on to live her life and describe this life and reckon it with other lives around her as like an adventure in love, in work, in life, in conflict, um mistakes, as well as tiny victories, in humor, you know what I mean, rage, um like the way that she deals with anger, like writing these hexes and curses, one of which is on the EP, the black-handed curse. They're so funny. And I'm just like imagining Wanda, you know, with someone very specific in mind, and just needing to exercise a kind of murderous rage into like one of the most hilarious poems I've ever read. Like, you don't want to be that person that Wanda hexed. It's just
I was like,
so
yo.
funny and so brutal.
Yeah.
And I was like, and yeah, that is so, like, it's like getting cursed out like on the street by somebody that you like, you know what I mean? I'm like, she's writing from this point of view that otherwise is almost like impossible, or there's just so much resistance to seeing it or embracing it. And um I guess she's that girl. Like, she's that girl that Sadia is like holding really close, you know? She's that woman. And it was kind of wonderful. I think, like, when I saw that question for you, I was like, oh, I think you identified something in terms of my attachment to Wanda, because during COVID, reading Sadia's book and just being completely devastated and enlivened, like nourished by it. And then really having time to sit with Wanda and recognizing this relationship, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful, that naming that temporal sort of flowing together of your engagements with Sadia and with Wanda. And I love, there's such a magic when right, one writing enriches your understanding of another.
Right.
I just think that that is the most thrilling feeling.
Yeah.
And then also to return just briefly to these curses and these moments of exorcism. I would love to talk about those a little bit more, like the way that she seems to almost cast these spells on the room in a way. And
Oh, yeah.
I was observing the way that people's bodies were responding to these poems, and the sort of like almost like the tension that they demand.
Yeah.
And there's this one where she says, um give me one moment, I'm sorry.
Okay.
May the false images you create devour all you give birth to.
Woo!
Images you worship obscure love. I was like, oh, wow. And then I was also just thinking about, yeah, that in relation to LA as well.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of like devouring, right? This
Right.
consumption. There's and then I was thinking of bell hooks's eating the other and all these things.
Right.
But anyways, yeah, I wanted to ask about this sense of um like an all-consumingness to her poetry,
Mhm.
and what kind of mood that creates or governs in the space.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why the video had to be completely like enveloping, like almost overwhelming, but also, like you said, quiet. But it's the kind of quiet that's like having your window rolled up instead of down. Like
Mm.
the noise is just right there. You know what I mean? And I think I feel like they're trying to get through one book of Wanda's poems would take me quite some time. I could read maybe read three poems quite slowly, maybe reread them, and then the fourth poem I would read would actually like put me in a state of needing a nap. Like I would be devastated, you know what I mean? Or I would just sort of like randomly choose a short story to read, and there's one in particular I can't really shake. She's inside of this young girl's mind who's kind of like being turned out by some pimps, and she intuitively knows what is happening, but she needs money. She needs to survive, and she's hoping that this isn't what it is weird as she thinks it is, and it is weird and it's worse. And we're still in her mind while she's realizing what's happening to her, and she's deciding that she's going to survive it. And I thought, like, how do you write a story like that that's about someone being really brutalized and violated and still have it be unapologetically about a woman deciding to survive and without any shame or judgment, just like this happens, and this is how we, I guess, we of the chorus um deal with this. Like, you know, I just, there's a kind of like, oh, the way she just sort of breaks down a lot of sort of like embedded investments in certain kinds of respectability that are of no use and maybe in our way at this moment. Like, and the way that she like can totally embrace the abject and still see the potential of this, the wisdom of this, like what is there of value, or that she doesn't place value on anything. She just is like taking it in. That is just, uh, it's like the thing that I learned from her about a kind of grace and generosity that isn't, it isn't like pious, and it isn't like peaceful. It's rageful, it's violent, and it's still extremely loving. You know what I mean? And I appreciate her for finding a way to put that in a page. And then also, if you ever watch YouTube and watch her perform, then you see this other register of what it means to actually confront Wanda as a performing artist, which is like that's a whole other conversation that I didn't even address in this work, you know?
I'm gonna need to do that right after this because
Yeah,
I haven't seen her perform live, or perform recorded live, I suppose.
right.
But that's something I wanted to ask you about as well, is um, the presence of her voice on the page, and then the presence of her voice as it is sort of recorded and encoded in the voices of your collaborators, but then the absence of her face in the videos, and the absence of her voice. So
Right.
yeah, that absent presence that you're negotiating. How did you come to terms with the decision to not include Wanda's a recording of Wanda's voice or an image of her face? How did you arrive at the decision to kind of subtly embed her, diffuse her memory in these other places and forms?
Yeah, you know, Wanda as a performer, I can't touch it. Like, it's so powerful. It is so her. It is so specifically her very calibrated, precise way of moving these poems off the page and into a room. When I watch her on these videos on YouTube, she has a very clear agenda with the audience in the room. Um, and like Douglas Kearney in the liner notes for the EP talks about teeth and the way she would use her mouth like as these bars, like this kind of like both like a shield and a weapon in her performativity. And these things to me are just like complete, and they don't really need me. Oh, hey, Doug. They don't really need me to uh to like deal with them. They exist and they were hers. They were really hers. But what she left us were the poems. And I felt like a need to work with like what she left us more than a need to like make a monument to her. I mean, she's so alive in these books. I'm not sure like a memento mori is even necessary. I guess if you want to know about Wanda, the individual woman, I don't know. I'm not really making a documentary. I'm trying to make work through her work and with her work. And I didn't really want to objectify her, I guess, which is really easy to do with film. Um, yeah.
That's such a beautiful answer. I'm obsessed with this idea of her being too alive for memorialization or for memento mori. I'm also obsessed with the teeth as both shield and weapon,
Right.
as both, yeah, something that can protect and something that can, as we have talked about, um, bite and exercise and cast out and conjure. Yeah, wow, I'm sitting with a lot of the things that you have said about memory as well, and what it means to love and memorialize in a way that is done without objectifying a person, the relationship between memory and objectification. Oof, with that, I'm curious to know how you made the decision about which poems would go on the EP. Given that, as you've said, she was so prolific and so much and so full of and full with who she was. What does it mean to select a few touchstones, right? To give to the world in this exhibition. How exactly did you sort through all of that? Psychically, emotionally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I try like what the impetus of the idea was really curious, like noticing these limericks that she would write, these little blues limericks. So like I had all of those bookmarked, like any poem where she indulged in this like really nice swing of a blues like rhyme, you know what I mean? And rhythm. But I like kind of marked all of those poems, but then when I looked at those, I was like, oh, there's a particular moment where she does that, and there's all these other things that she's doing too, right? Which are like the weather and the life on them streets kind of vibes. And then I started looking for that. Like I was like in my mind, if I'm going to shape an album before I even hear any music, like what is the shape of that? So I started looking for those poems that gave it a kind of shape. And then I gave those poems to the artist to like read through, maybe 20, 25 selects. And then I waited to hear what they thought or what questions they had or talk through things. And if they were overwhelmed by the poems, or I mean, it takes some time to sit with them. And then I would make suggestions, especially because there became a moment where everything was really time sensitive. Everything was like, can you record it like tomorrow? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you think? Like, you know what I mean? Where it got a little bit crazy in terms of like expectations of what an artist is supposed to do and what amount of time, you know what I mean? So, um, I, it became a kind of back and forth. Like with Alice Smith, I was really intrigued. I love her, the way she uses her voice, and she's very funny at the same time. At the same time that she's really sort of like elegant and sensuous. She has like a really wicked edge to her, I don't know, persona. And I thought that she would really like the black-handed curse because she can be so funny. And I thought, oh, like an elegant lady throwing down a curse like that, that's even funnier. You know what I mean? So, and she's just like, that's just not my vibe. I don't want to put that in the world. And I was like, oh, okay. So like she found her way towards a poem, and then also they were worried about, does it need to be like a literal interpretation or can I just respond to the poem? And I'm like, of course, respond, Like Wanda did her work, you do your work. Like, you know, so she made this thing that just sort of blew my mind. And then someone like Kelsey Liu, who I've never even met, we just had the really charming phone conversation. Um, and like she was like, I already know what poem I'm gonna do. And she chose one of the sonnets, which I love Wanda's sonnets. She's like, I already know what poem I want to do, and I already know what I want to do with it, and I'm ready to go. And that was like, there's like this range in between of like artists sort of like trying to find their way and artists who just were like, this is mine, you know? And that to me, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the poems from the artists and the way that they very, very lovingly and respectfully negotiated Wanda's powers. You know what I mean?
Yes. I also love so much that Kelsey came correct. She was like, I know what I want to do, and that's all. That's all. And there's a kind of like a foreknowledge almost that is involved in encountering poetry, wherein it lives. Yeah, it is the understanding that precedes our understanding of ourselves in some ways. And I mean, Audre Lorde writes about that in Poetry is Not a Luxury, right? She says something, this is gonna be a paraphrase rather than a direct quote, but it's the knowledge that precedes, that is anterior to everything else.
Exactly.
And I think that we feel that sense of the primordial very much in your installation, and also the sense of your relationship to LA existing and being stretched across. Yeah, there's a sense of intimacy and almost like primordial knowledge of the city that stretches across the scenes and the screens. And so I want to end about a question on time, and on the temporality. We talked before about rhythm, but I wanted to ask you about the futurity of this video, because, and this installation writ large. I know a lot of your work has engaged with Afrofuturism and concepts of speculative fiction. And I wanted to just end by asking you if there is any relationship, any relationship that you have conceptualized between an Afrofuturity and Wanda Coleman, between Afrofuturity and the Songbook.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what's happening? I lost you sound wise. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I
I
can hear.
can't hear. Oh, Zoe's muted now.
I'm
Just-
so sorry. I don't know what happened. I think my
Ah.
Wi-Fi just cut out for a minute, but I'm back now.
Okay, but you're asking about Afrofuturity, Wanda, the Songbook.
Yeah, that was basically the question, was what futures might this catapult us into,
Right.
this project?
I guess futures where wow, God, I don't know if I want to answer that question, but but
Okay.
I guess the thing that I learned from Wanda, or that Wanda demonstrates, the thing that Wanda demonstrates to me is like the power of like operating from the chorus, the power of being one of many, the power of refusing the world's rejection of you, and therefore embracing all those rejected, the power of mocking Black respectability in favor of Black joy in whatever form, and resistance and rage, in whatever form it manifests itself or is of use. I think the fact that you can't put a Wanda Coleman on Instagram, it's not possible to really do that. The fact that she cannot be contained or enclosed. And that is a model for how to make anything. Those are the lessons that I learned, I guess. And those are also, like, I guess that was always and will always be my interest in Afrofuturism, the kind of like escape or fugitivity of all manner of enclosures, whether they be time or material or our very bodies.
Wow. That's what an oracle and an incantation that was. I mean, I'm so appreciative of that answer. And this entire conversation is going to be living in me for a long time. And I can't wait to go back to your installation again and again and again until it closes. I'm so thrilled that I get to be in the same city as it. And
should we install a sun lamp so you can actually get the heat on you?
yes. Yeah, we need that because I mean, well, now it's like 50 degrees in New York, so I don't know what's going on, but
Wow.
it's gray, so I still feels like winter. And as I said to you before we started this live chat, yeah, when I left the gallery, it was really just the sense of sacred protection that the space offered. It really stuck on my bones for a long time, and is still there. And I'm so grateful to you, Cauleen, for this conversation, and for what your work offers me personally and the world broadly. And I'm thankful to Wanda as well. And I can't wait to watch some of her poetry on YouTube. I'm gonna go find that as soon as we get off this call. But thank you so much, Cauleen. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Chloe and the rest of the audience to ask their questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Zoe. That was so fun talking to you.
I love hearing that.
That was an absolute joy to watch. Thank you so much, Zoe and Colleen. That was amazing, and such a pleasure. So we do have a few questions from the audience if you'll have them, Colleen. The first one is going to be from Latasha. Latasha, if you'd like to unmute, I'm going to give you the chance to. If not, I can ask your question on your behalf as well.
You can ask the question on my behalf.
Okay,
Hey,
I will.
Colleen.
Hi, Latasha.
Hey.
Latasha says, I'd love to hear Colleen speak about the stencil projections. They work so much for me as double entendres.
Oh, yeah. Shadows, right? And then signs, more signs and signifiers of LA, I guess. Like, to me, each one of those images is a kind of Los Angeles talisman. Not to say that crows and power lines don't exist everywhere, because they do, but I feel like they, because of our kind of horizontal skyline, they have a particular presence here that I'm fixated on. The Olmec head is a signal in some neighborhoods in LA, or at least I interpret it as a signal that two communities, one Latinx and one Black, have decided to coexist because of, the Olmec head being the speculative, mysterious object in Mexico that obviously has some relationship to an African kind of like, or speculatively has like a African, I don't know, origin story of some sort. So the Olmec head in LA is like the signal of us both together. And I kind of look for it because not every neighborhood is like that. And then that LA sign, the original, the guy who made this sign first, the photographer, and I'm so sorry and embarrassed that I don't remember his name. Chicano photographer. The first time the sign was made, it was a woman's hands, and she had long nails and lots of rings on every finger. And I'd never seen that image before. I've only seen it now. It's like dudes, almost like a gang throw up. And I didn't realize that its origin was like this, like really like super fly chola just doing this. And that seems really important to me, that the origins of like the LA signifier came from East LA and from a girl, no less. So I just thought that was cool. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I just thought it was cool. I don't know if that's a really good answer. Sorry.
I think you are. I think you are, because I mean, particularly with you know, the duality of the image of that head, where it could either be something of authority, like a police officer, um, and at the same time, it can be that Olmec head, and then depending on who's telling the narrative, if it's Ivan Van Sertima, they came before Columbus, you know, it's the Africans that voyaged over to the Americas before Europeans. Or it could be totally like, nah, this is us. We were over here a long time ago. It is, you know, indigenous to this part of the world. So yeah, I think you're hitting it. I mean, but also the layering, the layered meanings and representations of LA within LA.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that question, Latasha, and thank you for that incredibly generous answer, Colleen. The next question is going to be from GE. GE, I'll give you a chance to unmute to ask.
Oh, thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you, everyone. You know, anybody that probably knew her knew that she was such a wonderful letter writer and note writer, and in an age when all that seemed to be disappearing, she was just a letter writer. Is any of this kind of stuff involved in your making, or is it backdrop or background or any of that? Because as I said, there's so much of it.
Yeah, definitely backdrop. And if I have an opportunity to revisit Wanda and expand on this project, like maybe make a book to go with it, I would. There's a lot of things that like that I would include. The poet, LA poet Harriet Mullen, sent me this incredible JPEG of one of her poems that was written in a death certificate form. I was telling Doug Kearney about that too. There's so much ephemera that speaks to kind of like how she moved through the world and also the things that she contemplated quite intensely. Yes, definitely. And also I saw your comment about Flaco, the owl, which I'm like, yes, I love me some Flaco. So anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, GE. The last one is more of a comment, and Doug's no longer in the room, but I'm going to pose this to you because it was in the chat, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, Colleen. Doug wrote, LA is a site of hunger. The part of it that is stereotypically LA, however, is not Angelina's appetite, rather a hunger projected from elsewhere. One thing I appreciated about Wanda Coleman's work is how she was able to show Angelino hunger in tension with the projected. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, yeah, that's why I like talking to Doug, because that's spot on. Wow. Yeah, the hunger that LA manufactures and others versus the hunger that we here experience, there is a profound tension and gap between those two things. And I wish Doug were here to talk more about it because that's just brilliant.
Thank you, Doug, for that comment. And thank you, Colleen, for answering everybody's questions. And thank you again, Colleen and Zoe, for this dialogue today, which was absolutely brilliant and such a pleasure to listen to. Colleen, I know you are going to close us out with a poem by Wanda Coleman, so I'll pass you the mic to do so.
Okay, and I just want to preface this by apologizing because even though I practiced reading it, I'm going to mess it up. And I apologize to you and to Wanda. I was thinking there's this one poem that has just been with me for many weeks now. It's from a Curriculum. This is my favorite volume of Wanda's. It's hard to pick a favorite, but this one is fire from beginning to end, I think. And I was like, oh, I hope I can find the poem, and my book just opened to it. The title is Thief Heart. Here we go. Thief Heart. Were I the queen of sleight of hand, I'd steal the wind from a thunderstorm if I could. I'd steal the sweetness out of fresh baked bread. It smells so good. I'd steal the stink from the core of night. I'd steal the thrill and a thief's delight. No, I would. Steal the wings off the flitting dove, the memory of a brother's love. I'd steal the tea from the end of time. I'd steal the wolf of a nursery rhyme. I'd steal the dither from its troubled spin. I'd steal my mind from the brain it's in. I'd steal the rose from the end of bloom. I'd steal my son from his cancer's doom. I'd steal the corners from my frown. I'd steal your smile if it wasn't nailed down. Were I the queen of sleight of hand, I'd steal the poison from this motherland.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Cauleen, for reading that. And thank you again for today. And thank you as well to Aaron and Haley and the team at David Zorner who helped support in preparing for today. And thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free on Monday at a special time of 6:30 p.m. Eastern, join us for a conversation with curator, scholar, and publisher Sophia Kidd, hosted by Paul Gladstone as part of Gladstone's ongoing NSE series on post-West art and visual culture. And as is tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Colleen.
Thank you so,
Thank
so much.
you.
Colleen.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wanda.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
Colleen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cauleen.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wanda.
Zoe, that was amazing.
Krista, hi.
Oh,
Thank you.
Hi,
you,
thank you.
Colleen.
Hi,
Thank you so much.
Tisha.
Wanda. Hi.
Thanks, you guys. This is so fun.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Good to see you all. Bye, everyone. Take
Bye.
care.
Good
Thank you
weekend,
so
everyone.
much. This was
Bye.
amazing.
Thank
Take
you.
care.